Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our public talk series presented by our fellows. I'm Claudia Rizzini, the Executive Director of the Radcliffe Fellowship Program at Harvard University. It is my pleasure to introduce Monica Bell, our Drew Gilpin Faust Fellow. How does a lived experience, affected and often limited by the law, shape the way we think about institutions that craft and enforce the law? Monica, a legal scholar and sociologist, examines the interconnected relationship among the criminal legal system, policing, and institutional repression, and the ways these forces manifest in the everyday lives of low-income communities of color. In a term she coined, legal estrangement, Monica articulates how communities of color are at once subject to the laws and excluded from their protection. By shifting the focus from individual attitudes about law enforcement, Monica highlights the complexities of a community's collective relationship with policing. Her scholarship explores both the theoretical implications and real-life consequences, which often influence where parents choose to live, raise their children, as well as the circumstances in which they call the police for help. But how do we communicate the visceral day-to-day realities of legal estrangement? While at Radcliffe, Monica is working to complete Soul Codes, a manuscript of empirical poems that translates in-depth interviews with 50 Black mothers living in subsidized housing in Washington, D.C. into poetry. With its rhythm and rhymes, lines and stanzas, Monica distills the mothers' experiences with institutional repression into powerful vignettes, offering a glimpse of their humor and charm, and rendering the nuances of their perspectives. In walking alongside these women throughout the poems, Monica hopes reader will not only feel empathy, but also be moved to action, to form a new coalition of advocacy. The Q&A portion of the public talk today will be moderated by Beronda Montgomery, our Sally Starling Seaver Fellow and Professor at the Department of Biology at Grinnell College. And now please join me in welcoming Monica Bell.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with gratitude for the incredible opportunity to be here. I'm grateful to Claudia, to Sharon, Jimena, Jen, Maria, Kayla, everyone else involved in the administration and selection processes for this fellowship, and all of my fellow fellows, with special thanks in advance to Beronda for moderating the Q&A. I'm also grateful to some members of my chosen family for being here, and especially to Yassine and Xander for making a long trip up. And I'm really grateful and appreciate the opportunity to be in community with you in general and to share this work in progress with you. Dirty House Andrika. I've heard stories about people who have lost their children. I was in high school. They would say, so-and-so got our kids taken. Her house was too dirty. I was scared to death. I have heard of people that if your house isn't clean and they come in there and your house is really filthy, they would take your kids. How filthy do your house have to be? I'm not the neatest person. My house is comfortable. How dirty does your house have to be for them to take your kids? When they said dirty, what do they mean? When I look at hoarders, I don't know if you know hoarders, I was thinking, this must be what they mean? Because I would think if they saw a pile of dirty clothes or whatever, I wouldn't think they would say, I'm going to take your daughter. How dirty does your house have to be? The unpunishable child, Tiffany. How do you punish the unpunishable child? In this case, she was stealing. I whooped her behind. They came and snatched her, stealing, taking something without permission. Even though it was a piece of candy from my neighbor's purse, it was still stealing. She didn't ask permission. Whooped her behind with a belt, whooped her behind, a bruise. The lady called me while I was at work. To have your child taken, the worst feeling in the world, the worst thing a mother can feel. My thing of it is, if I don't stop her from stealing, someone is going to question my parenting skills when she gets older. Why didn't you stop this? They said, punish her, send her to her room, put her in the corner. They said, make her write, she likes to write. Make her read a book, she likes to read. Take the TV away, she's not watching TV. Take her games from her, she don't do that either. Put her in the corner, she sings in the corner. Make her stand in the corner. I said she'll sing and annoy me. Stand on one foot, she'll be playing with her feet. He. After that, they sort of understood. I have an unpunishable child. After everything I had to do, parenting classes, anger management, counselor. After 8 months, she's back in my home. She came back home to me. After they snatched her, I have tried to understand, partially, why my mother didn't get us back. So these are two pieces from this book manuscript containing empirical poems I have been working on and will continue to unfold this year. I'll try to explain what an empirical poem is shortly, but first I want to say a bit more about the context of the pieces I just read. So both of these women with pseudonyms, Andrika and Tiffany, I interviewed in Washington, D.C. more than a decade ago. So they were speaking about their perspectives on child protective services, or what is now often called family policing or the family regulation system. So more than half of the 50 women I interviewed told me that they had been subject of a report and investigation by DC's Child and Family Services Agency. And I might note that that's likely an underreport, given that people don't often just tell people that this is something they've experienced. But Andrika, the speaker in the first poem, was not one of those more than 50%. So much of the writing and advocacy around family policing rightfully focuses on its dynamics for families who directly participate in it. But this poem conveys a different type of systemic harm, a kind of amorphous looming dread that makes mundane life circumstances like having a pile of dirty clothes in your corner seem risky, even if it's not technically correct that children are routinely removed for that reason alone. So this poem represents, in a new context and a new form, what I have called in other writing legal estrangement. So a legal estrangement is a process by which historically excluded groups experience and come to understand their disadvantage in the face of law and legal authority. So that sense, I argue at least, is not primarily the consequence of direct personal experience, but in larger part through vicarious, collective meaning-making and collective experience. So the second poem comes from a much different vantage point. There, the experience is direct and intimate and multi-generational. So by using corporal punishment to reprimand her daughter for a minor infraction that seemed like it could foretell future criminal behavior, Tiffany thought she was doing right by both her daughter and herself in reacting in this way. So her experience made me think of this theory of policing. I spent a lot of time writing and thinking about policing, and one of the theories that has been extremely influential over the last 30 to 40 years is this idea called broken windows theory. And it suggests that when police focus on addressing minor, barely punishable offenses, it's an effective deterrent against more serious future crimes. The theory and its practice are extremely flawed in ways that I can't get into right now, but its influence has endured. And so when I was thinking about this, it's almost like Tiffany was applying a broken windows theory of parenting. You stiffly punish your daughter for stealing gum out of someone's purse, and you keep her from becoming a true thief later on in life. It all seems very logical from this standpoint, even if, like broken windows policing, that approach produces a great deal of unnecessary harm. You might also note that Tiffany was herself removed from her home as a child. In a different poem in the larger group, we learn more about Tiffany's experience and the resentment she feels because her mother didn't try to raise her. She feels like she didn't try hard enough. Her experience going through the family policing regime as a parent helped her process her childhood experience differently, with more insight about some of the institutional factors that her mother might have needed to confront. So I want to take a moment here now and explain what empirical poetry is, at least as I'm trying to think about it. So simply, an empirical poem is a poem drawn solely from an interview transcript or ethnographic notes that captures themes that emerge from a body of data. So I call these pieces empirical poems because they're the product of social science research and represent general themes from the data I collected and coded. There are also found poems, or poems that have been created using only words from a pre-existing text. So this means that, for example, repetition, which I use fairly frequently, is only possible in these poems because the research participant actually used that repeated word that many times or more. So here, the pre-existing texts are transcripts from interviews that I conducted way back in 2012 and 2013. Thus far, there are about 250 draft poems in the collection, which is more than I could reasonably include. So I'm in a culling and editing and structuring process, and I'm hoping to add visual material and short essays into the manuscript. So I interviewed, as I said, 50 low-income Black women with children who lived in Washington, D.C. Some of the general characteristics of this sample and their experiences with various legal authorities are summarized in this chart. So I've published several writings that are based on these interviews, that draw stories from these interviews over the ensuing years. But I've also spent many years feeling haunted by these interviews. So the women shared very powerful stories with me about their communities, their families, and themselves, but because of the narrow focuses of the papers I wrote, nearly all of the deeper experiences they shared have been left on the cutting room floor. We often and rightfully worry about the fraught ethics of qualitative research, especially research that's conducted with members of communities that face structural inequities. There's a lot one could say about that, including with respect to this project, but one concern that I think doesn't get quite enough airtime is that the ethics is kind of like thinking hard about the ethics of asking for and receiving someone's story in the process of research, and then never doing much with it, never sharing as much of the story they shared as possible. Over time, I've really come to believe that an interview is a sacred undertaking, and it comes with obligations that are separate from the usual ways research ethics are enforced at universities. So for me, one big personal motivation behind the project has been trying to make sure I'm like a good and faithful steward of the stories that these women shared with me. Okay, so moving along, one of the criteria for participating in this study was living in publicly subsidized housing. So many of the women were also navigating other strands of the social safety net. The welfare script, Angie. I have to express this. I go, I participate, I look for a job. I've got to explain to them, I don't want welfare. It's like I've got to express that. Then their attitude and their tone changes. After I'm like, I've been to school, I've been to college, I have education just like you do. The only reason I'm on it is I need help at this moment. Once I say that, their tone changes. They could be experiencing people with negative attitudes, people with hostility in their voice. You have to beg. My benefits were sanctioned. Lady representative on the phone, a spiel. Who you need to talk to, I don't know. I'm not going to help you, I don't know. You could hear her sighing. You are just another TANF collector. I was expressing, lady, look, I go to school, I'm really involved, I'm desperately looking for a job. I have some college education. I have wrote council members, congressmen. I don't want to collect your benefits. The tone changed. Food stamps, hot damn, Katina. I don't hide nothing from them. Eggs are expensive, food is high. I'd have to rack my brains for how I'm going to feed these kids. My daughter's babysitter, she'll feed her. I've been pretty lucky. The girl downstairs, when it get close to the end of the month and you run out of food, I'd be like, what you got? We can take our food and put it together. Spaghetti, here I am. It hurts me to see a kid out here in the dead of winter without a jacket. I got a coat sitting in my house. Help those in need. That's how I get my blessings. I got food stamps. I can work 7 days a week and still not be able to provide a month of food. I'm the youngest female in this court with my own apartment, working, Medicaid, and food stamps. I love this court. A day like today, we'll cook on the grill, bring hamburgers and hot dogs out of our house for the kids, the projects, family-oriented, scary sometimes, damn. So there is very little safety net left in America. Few families are even eligible for cash public benefits as they're discussing today. And to the extent it exists, there is a long-standing body of literature that discusses the administrative burden and the shaming practices that are seemingly endemic to it. But what I want to highlight about what Angie says in the welfare script poem is her awareness of the required performance. It's like counterintuitively, to ease the experience of getting public assistance, you have to reject the concept of it. You have to make it clear that you're in an exceptional circumstance while resisting the idea that people could just be eligible for a benefit and feel entitled to it. The poem Food Stamps, Hot Damn Katina is in the form of a golden shovel. So the golden shovel is a form created by the poet Terrence Hayes, and that form works by paying homage to a pre-existing poem by using that poem or some small excerpt of the poem as the final word in each line of a new poem. So if you look at the last word in each line of this poem, it says, how lucky I am, I got food stamps, hot damn. So those words are one of the central refrains in one of my favorite poems of all time, which is Song of the Law-Abiding Citizen by June Jordan, whose papers I was very happy to learn are housed here at Radcliffe in the Schlesinger Library. So that poem uses multiple layers of irony to critique the insufficiency of the public safety net, the incapacity of law to protect and support people, and essentially the welfare script. So the speaker in the Song of the Law-Abiding Citizen is giving a performance that isn't too different from the presentation Angie describes giving when she has to visit the DC Department of Human Services. So in this poem, Katina is bringing together several themes related to food stamps and poverty that might seem incompatible to some people who'd like to get really simple takeaways from her. So she's celebrating her accomplishment of having her life pretty well put together and sorted out at a young age, while also acknowledging that she runs out of food almost every month. She's being candid about her struggles to feed her family, while expressing gratitude for having resources to help other people who are struggling. She lauds the sense of community and love in the public housing complex where she lives, while taking at length in the interview and is reflected in another piece, reflecting about how dangerous it feels sometimes and how much she wishes she could take her children and move somewhere else. So this poem uses paradox, and all of it is very authentic to her and her experience. And I think this captures perhaps what should be an obvious theme that I hope will carry across the entire project, which is that Black women are people like any other people with complicated and nuanced and multi-layered perspectives. And this is true despite the social and political tendency to flatten Black women into what Patricia Hill Collins famously described as controlling images or stereotypes that justify domination. So back to this. Most readers ask about the process I used to construct these pieces, so I thought I'd pause here to say a bit about that, but I hope it isn't too boring. I figured out my own method as the project moved along, but most of what I did can be boiled down to this slide. So there were two major phases of data coding. The first is traditional empirical coding that we do with qualitative research all the time. I've highlighted 3 of those best practices that I use in coding these data here. So finding themes, asking for other people to code too as a check on reliability, and looking for cases that deviate from the general findings or negative cases to sharpen any empirical or theoretical takeaways. This was all done years ago in this project and is pretty standard. But the second is what I'm calling poetic coding, and that's been the more recent work. And in this phase, I've been more interested in centering the participant. So this has meant reading transcripts in full, over and over, sitting with them, dreaming about them, ruminating on them late at night and early in the morning, occasionally listening to audio tapes, and pulling out specific chunks of the transcript once I've sat with it enough. So that's what I'm calling coding for emotional resonance. One of the benefits of poetry is that it's good at capturing uncertainty and complexity and ambivalence, and those are themes that are purposely erased in most traditional research reporting because they can make it harder to convey straightforward findings with clear and actionable takeaways. But in this poetic coding process, I've tried to just directly tangle with that complexity and embrace it, with especially the internal contradiction and uncertainty, rather than managing it away as we otherwise tend to do. And the third piece is experimentation, and while that last piece might be annoying, this might actually be the most unsatisfying aspect of trying to describe what I've been up to, because it's the part that's the least clearly replicable in any meaningful sense of that word. So I explore, I test out different forms and non-forms, moving words and phrases around over and over again. But the disciplinary commitment is trying to preserve the speaker's voice and the intention of their words as I see it. Other than that, the form and the cadence and the style I developed slowly over time. But I should note, I only learned after I did all of this that Sandra Faulkner, who is a communication scholar, has actually published a methods textbook on research poetry. I learned after I started developing my method that there are a small number of other people scattered across disciplines and not generally speaking to each other in sociology, anthropology, geography, environmental science, and others who have started creating poetry from their research. So one curiosity I have for this year is to see how my approach and theirs align and diverge. Okay, with that, let me introduce you to Willa. A love story, Willa. Honey, I'll never forget Valentine's Day, what happened the first time I felt the intimacy of love. I had our son out of love. Then he went to jail, incarcerated, the love child too. I used to tell the love child, you're not going to be satisfied until you're in a jail cell with your father. That come true. He was 18 in the system. 3 or 4 years housed together. Father and son were cellmates. 3 or 4 years, he taught him how to do time. They were cellmates. In jail, they let him raise his child. Girl, they used to call me. My son called. Mom, you need to talk to my father. I'm a Christian. He want me to be a Muslim. His father called. I don't know what I'm going to do with this kid. He's as stubborn as you. I visit both. Traveling girl. I love to travel. West Virginia, Florida, Kentucky. I might take that $25, go traveling right now. That was amazing. They're split up now. Murder, doing life. Still love him. I'd marry him. So we rarely see stories about incarceration and about a situation like this, just kind of conveyed with a type of verve and humor that was vibrating throughout my conversation with Willa. So the basic facts of the story are bleak. Willa is telling us that the man she has been in love with for decades and the beloved son she had with him are both incarcerated, and she has to travel to these kind of places, not so glamorous places necessarily, to see them. But Willa used this lighthearted language to describe the man she loved and the effort he put into mentoring their son in prison. She conveys stories about their interactions that sound like anyone's mundane experience of co-parenting a young adult, the laughter, the bickering, the strategizing. Of course, Willa was not trying to tell me that she was happy about this experience, But I hope that by capturing not just the fact of the experience, but also her affect when she spoke about it, it helps the reader understand on a richer level like what her truth actually is and about the multiple ways that people approach difficult or even tragic situations. Okay, I want to pivot back quickly to say a word about why someone might find this method useful in their research, or at least why I found it useful. So one night in 2018, I was trying to write an article that started with the stories of two young people from Baltimore who had each lost a friend to violence. So the usual style of qualitative research presentation, it just wasn't working. Like what I remembered from sitting in the interviews was how raw but subtle their stories were. But every excerpt and every block quote I could pull just failed to capture what I really felt I was hearing. So I just woke up in the middle of the night and had this idea to try combining these two transcript excerpts into a poem because I thought maybe it would provide the most authentic representation of what we had learned. And it was really the only tool I could think of that might work. It is not impossible, but it is very difficult to capture subtlety or hesitation or silence or laughter or pain in social science's usual approaches to reporting research results. So with limited space, we often default to this way of speaking about people, like, according to Tanya, 44-year-old mother of 3, or some other flat set of descriptors that are accurate, but that depict Tanya more like a collection of identity markers than like a flesh and blood human being. So that's something I'm hoping this method provides one of many tools for finding our way out of that. So there are a couple more pieces I want to share with you today. The next is Untitled Betty. All 3 of my kids have the same father. He was happy, and then he wound up dying. 25, tripping, playing with a gun. I was sitting on the bed. He was standing up, acting mean. Then he was sitting beside me. I was already sitting on the bed. When he sit on the bed, I saw his hand go up. I heard a pow. I was gone. Ran downstairs to the kitchen and the grandmother. Nada's upstairs playing with the gun. That's something that you don't do. You don't play with a gun. She said, I don't hear nothing. Sure enough, she went up there, started screaming and hollering. When the police came, they questioned me, and the police didn't see no powder burns on my hands. They said, how did the gun get out of his hand? I said, I don't know. I didn't even know it was out of his hand. The grandmother came out of the kitchen. She said, when I saw my baby laying there, I threw it across the room. I took it out of his hand. People try to blame me because I was there. When things go on, they don't want to believe. Some family members didn't want to believe. People don't want to believe. The family didn't want to believe that he did that. So they were saying crazy stuff. I've been through a lot of crazy stuff. What makes me so sad is 20-some years after that, the nephew did the same thing. 23, stressed out, playing with a gun. His girlfriend called the police. The police was there when he did it. The police were saying, son, don't do it. They heard the gunshot go. He did it. Guess what? They still tried to blame his girlfriend. Why didn't she let us know that he was saying all kinds of stuff? So much craziness over and over. People say you ought to sue. Sue for what? One time I went to a psychiatrist program. I didn't feel a need that I needed to go. I don't go to church like I should. I don't do the things that I'm supposed to do. I never questioned God, really, why me? I talked to him, said, please help me, please keep me. People say, Betty, you're so strong. That's all they saw, but behind closed doors, like a baby. For years I cried. A lot of people say, Betty, you still strong. They don't know I cried my heart out, behind closed doors. Talk to God, nobody but him. God has always been there for me. God has always been on my side. When you have God on your side, I'm nauseated, but I'm all right, a free mind. So I don't feel I need to speak more on Betty's experience at all, but I only want to take a moment here to note that this is an example of what I mean by law's shadows in the subtitle of this project. So in many of the poems, law is front and center. Women are talking about experiences with or perspectives on governing institutions and their policies and practices. But many others of the poems, law is submerged, but legal authority is still there, nestled in the interstices of intimate life, in part because it's just so omnipresent. So where is law here in this story of what happened to Betty and her loved ones? The most obvious is the way police appear as the crisis responders when her nephew is threatening to shoot himself, and the investigators when Betty's partner shot himself. We also see Betty invoke law when she ponders whether there's someone she could find to sue for the devastation she survived. But there are other like subtler places where law appears too. So for example, the poem conjures 2 generations of Black men who are struggling with their mental health. I don't know the specifics of each man's challenges. I chose not to probe Betty on that for, I hope, obvious reasons. But I do know that it's impossible to seriously engage in a discussion of Black men's mental health in the 20th and 21st centuries without taking into account how law and policy have intensified certain features of racialized suffering. Many of these law-infused bludgeons fall disproportionately on Black men. Forces like mass incarceration, policing, educational inequality, barriers to acquiring income and capital, and so many more that I don't have the time now to go into. But all of that provides the architecture for stories like Betty's. So that's just one example of what I mean and how the poems aim to soften those law's shadows. As I head toward the end of this talk, I want to pause and say one more word about why anyone should care about reading poetry or writing poetry at times like these, when it feels like so many institutions and norms and even the planet itself are on the brink of collapse. So I don't have a definitive response to that, but I am inspired by the poet, scholar, and activist Audre Lorde on this point specifically. So in her essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury, Lorde explains the importance of writing poetry, especially for women. She contends that poetry forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. She continues, poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. You know, we're living through a moment in history when it is crucial to rename and rethink the social and global orders we inhabit. So poetry is one of many tools that can embolden us to build a new and better future together, even if we can only see fragments of that future on the horizon right now. With that, I'll read the final piece for today. Teen Cafe Teresa. I've got something good in store for me. It's going to sound strange. We're going to open something big. My own restaurant I'm going to open. It's going to be a teen cafe. For kids, 4 nights. For adults, 2 nights, called Bahamanian. The teen club is going to have pinball machines, big flat screen TVs on the wall where the kids can play Xbox, PlayStation. A dance floor, talent night we're going to have. They're going to have entertainment too. Maybe we'll try to get a rapper or young R&B stars to come through. Kids will get to do rap or poetry. It's going to cost you to get in, but if you have a membership, you can get a discount. We're going to serve cheeseburgers and wings, fruit drinks, smoothies, Slurpees. Get your picture taken, to have membership cards. When they have the card, they can get in for half price. They're going to need the card. It's going to be cool. I want to open up my own cafe too, maybe upstairs. Jazz, reggae, R&B, mainly jazz. I'll serve some light hors d'oeuvres, maybe alcohol. I'm going to serve wine, maybe deli sandwiches, salmon and salad, maybe buffalo wings. I'm going to have my cakes. I'm going to name it Snazzies. It's going to be nice. It's going to be nice. I'm going to school, hospitality management. I'm going to school, college UDC, hotel and restaurant, hospitality management. I'm going to work on me, and then I'm going to be somebody else. I want to have a family foundation. We'd go to church on Sundays. We'd travel, basketball, football. You see all those trophies? My son is going to be a draft pick for the NBA. Both of them. Yes, they are. You can say, I stopped at this lady's house and she told me. My son, the baby, it was his idea, the teen club. My restaurant, even if I can't go to work every day, my baby boy goes to school. They have courses on business and marketing. People go for hotel and restaurant management. My kids will be able to run the whole thing. It's going to happen with the help of the good Lord. Me, my boys, we're going to be fine. I take my boys to church and Sunday school. I just prayed. My kids know when troubles come about, we may worry, that's the human side of us, but we need to pray. We know how to pray. My boys know who God is. They know he can move mountains. They know he's going to take us out of this mess. They don't want to live here forever. I know God is so good. So as I close, I have a confession to make. When I was initially constructing this piece, I found it very distressing. I remember sitting on a couch across from Teresa, watching her spin up dreams in her apartment, knowing that she was making ends meet with just a meager disability check because she had been severely injured on her job, which is why she foretells not being able to necessarily run the restaurant the whole time herself. So I didn't see a clear path toward the fulfillment of her vision, so her dreams kind of made me uncomfortable. I thought the restaurant business is basically impossible, the plan, there's a lot going on, where would she even get the funds for this? But this was one of the first poems I reread and edited on the morning after the most recent presidential election. And as I re-engaged with Teresa's words that morning, I realized that I had actually missed the most important interpretation of her vision. So every concern I raised was legitimate, but Teresa was not mired in those types of concerns. She couldn't afford to be. She needed a bold and motivational vision now to empower her, to raise her children so they could radically change their circumstances. Focusing on the funding stream was fixating on the type of minutia that lulls people into overwhelm, stagnation, and inaction in times of crisis. And I realized when I reread the piece that I needed to be more like that, because none of us can afford to let the onslaught of iniquities cloud our vision or chill our work. So I'm hoping that in this book, readers will find complexity, insight, and shared humanity in ways that will ultimately contribute to a more just and compassionate world. Thank you.
Dr. Bell, that was powerful, really powerful. Thank you for your work and for exploring different ways to live out what you describe as being a good steward. We don't have to go there in our work, and I appreciate you for doing that in your work. One of the questions that I have for you was, in relation to your being what you describe a good steward, can you talk a little bit more about how you decided that empirical poetry was the path for that in particular?
Yeah, so it really has been very organic, right? First of all, I'm not like some evangelist for empirical poetry as being the solution to all of our problems. But what I tried to do was just really revisit the work and think of whatever the best way that I felt I could offer to pay homage to these women. And then there were various types of just logistical challenges that made this project come about in this way. So I actually had a plan years ago to re-interview the mothers who participated in the study. And the idea was to kind of write a more thick, rich book. But because of some quirky thing with IRB, I actually had to destroy everyone's contact information, and I wasn't able to do the re-interviews. So that meant that I then needed to think about ways that I could live up to what I felt I was supposed to be doing with the project vis-a-vis their stories while not having the opportunity. And this is just kind of what emerged. But I'm not someone with a poetic background.
I was about to say, do you consider yourself a poet?
No.
No.
No, I don't.
So how did you prepare to to become a poet?
Well, I took poetry classes. I've taken a bunch now, thanks to Brooklyn Poets.
Yes.
But yeah, so I've taken a bunch of classes. I have tried to share pieces with people who are more involved in poetry. But I come at this very humbly. Like I don't hold myself out as a poet. I'm a social scientist who wants to do a better job by my participants.
So we shouldn't look for a future poetry book from you?
Not beyond. So it's so funny. Like in the poetry classes, sometimes they're like, "Oh, write a poem from your own experience," and I don't have it. I haven't been unable to produce one.
You got to use the tools.
They were just reading interview-based poems.
So I wonder how you're thinking about who your audience is, and if poetry is a unique kind of tool for getting to the audience that you imagine. And I thought about something that I read in your proposal. You said that part of your goal is to move beyond empathy toward coalition. Mm-hmm. And do you see this as a kind of powerful path for that and getting to a particular audience?
Yeah. So without being, I don't want to be delusional. I mean, I know there is often a limited audience for academic work, but one of the things that I hope comes through is something I was alluded to in the presentation. It's just like about basic humanity, right? Like, so for very good reasons, especially in sociology, it's like we have a structural analysis of situations. So we think about people categorically, and that actually there's some barriers that emerge in that it almost suggests that someone who is very, very far away from that structural experience could deeply identify, like there's a barrier whether they could deeply identify with someone who has a much different structural experience. And I think that what comes through for me is I don't really think that's true. Like, so when people are reading about Dirty House and thinking, oh wow, it would be awful if you had to worry about the state coming in because you like left a pile of dirty clothes on the floor, that's something that I think all of us can be like, man, that's not great. That's the type of connection I hope that people would make from reading the poems, which is like, me too. Like I really connect with that story. So that's.
Yeah, as I was listening to you today, and also, having read some about your work, I'm reading into you, so you can reject what I'm about to say. Okay. But you look like you were nervous.
I am nervous. Okay. I'm like, read into me.
I'm not going to do that to you.
Yikes.
No. Well, no, what I heard is that it sounded to me like you yourself were searching for something to capture what you were hearing beyond just a block quote. And so empirical poetry came a way for you to try to capture some of what you were experiencing. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you're hoping that too will allow the reader, looking at it in a different way. One of the things that struck me, I love poetry. For a long time, I thought I was going to be a poet until my mother said, we don't need another Maya Angelou. You got to be yourself, because that's what I was doing.
But don't we?
Well, but you have to be the best you. But even as I was looking at it on the screen, sometimes looking at the form of poetry is different than looking at a block quote. And I think we enter into reading poetry expecting to have an emotion, to like it or not like it. And I wonder if you think about even that as part of trying to capture what you experienced in the interview for yourself and then for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anything, I could say that is in fact the number one, or I don't want to say number one, but it's a prime motivation, which is that like, the way people read poetry is fundamentally different. It's not just that people are expecting an emotion, they're also expecting to feel things that are not just on the page and to kind of sit in a gap. It's like there's an evocative word, but then there's a pause after the word for you to digest it. There's the form. It's like looking at the form sends a message in itself about the meaning. Yes. And I don't know that I have the perfect efficacy at that, but that is something that I think poetry simply offers that a block quote doesn't. And so that is certainly something I'm hoping for.
Yeah, as you were talking about it, I realized that for me, block quotes feel like reporting, trying to be accurate and reporting.
Yeah.
Whereas what it feels like you're trying to do is to invite us into what they're sharing, which feels like stewardship, right, of the interview process. So just was thinking about that a lot as you were talking about it. But can you tell me a little bit more? Who do you hope the audience will be?
Yeah. I mean, so there's a kind of like flipped answer, which is that I hope as many people as possible will read it. But I hope anyone who wants to connect across humanity would read it. And I also hope that people from the communities actually one of the reasons I've felt like with all of my struggles with this project, one of the reasons I felt compelled to push on is because many people who are in structurally similar situations have read various pieces and told me that it really connects and means something to them. So, I mean, I think sometimes in these kind of conversations about the ways to convey social science, there's this kind of like idea of the the gaze of others.
Yes.
But one of the motivations for this project is I don't think this is a gaze of others project. I think it's also very much for people in structurally similar situations. I do, I do hope that social scientists will read this, and I hope that social scientists and legal scholars and people who are focused on these systems and thinking about people's experiences with them will read the project and think about the importance of affective reasoning. Like think about like you can't actually separate logic and feeling. We know this experientially, but I think a lot of times the work of social science and the work of legal scholarship tries to sanitize that away. And I'm trying to embrace it in order to shed light on the problems with that way of reasoning.
I will tell you, I could use all the rest of the time talking to you from my own questions, but I will not do that because I'll have many opportunities, as you know, to snag you, as I often have. There are lots of questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that they get a chance to have some attention. I will kind of synthesize some of them because there are a lot, which is a good thing, a lot of interest. But one of them I was also interested in. It was about the photos, the interest in the beautiful photos that you're choosing to accompany some of these poems. Who are the people? I was also interested in, are you the photographer or other people what's the source of those and how are you pairing them with particular poems?
Yeah, so I took all those photos.
I suspected so.
And they're a combination of things. There's some that are pictures of people I know, but there's a lot, I've kind of gotten hobbyist into street photography. So a lot of them are just in my community, in DC as well, architecture in DC. I'm hoping to go back to DC and take some more photos. But they're mine.
Awesome, they're beautiful. So someone says, I love this project. No, I absolutely love it. I'm wondering if you can talk more about the relationship between the coding and the poems. They also ask about audience and how does this work affect your career? And I'll just add on, if you're worried about how it will affect your career, and that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm not an appropriate academic because like the whole like lockstepping, I don't know how I wound up here.
You decide appropriate though. You define appropriate for yourself. You are highly appropriate.
It is what it is. I mean, I want freedom. Like I want to be able to write things that matter, and the things that I have that I'm kind of cooking up for next are really different from this. But they're things that just feel organic to questions I think are important. And so I don't have a solution about the career thing. But what was the first part of the question again? The coding.
Coding, yeah.
And that was the second part too.
Yeah, they were asking about audience, but also if you can talk more about the relationship between coding and the poems.
I think this is probably pretty unsatisfying, but maybe this is what I'll say. So if a poem, like when I'm going through this culling process through all these poems, if the poem feels like it's not really in step with something that seemed like a theme that was significant from the research, those are the ones I'm pitching. And they're actually quite a lot. There are quite a lot of those. Maybe it's a small number, but yeah, so those like things that I thought were like moving or interesting but that didn't really connect to a theme in any meaningful way or not really in the piece, yeah.
So another question is, what might be some of the uses of your poetry by scholars, legal practitioners, or even ordinary people?
I mean, I think people use poems in a lot of different ways. I mean, I think, this is kind of I don't know how I feel about this, how I would say this, but there's something very efficient about a poem sometimes. And so if I were someone doing advocacy before a body, like maybe before the DC Council, right? Like you can envision reading a short piece or having a group of people read a short piece, and it's just a much more condensed way of getting across an impactful point. So I could imagine a use like that. I also think that poems are many times motivating to people. Like I hope, for example, if someone reads Teen Cafe, they're like, okay, I'm also motivated. Poems can serve as rallying cries for doing active work, and so those are just two quick examples of things I can think of.
Another question is, how do you see empirical poetry in relationship to traditional human subjects research model of inquiry? Or how can the alternative modes of presenting data become more acceptable in the research world?
I mean, I think, the first question, really, like, this project is actually very traditional. Like it goes through, went through IRB, there are transcripts, there's coded, like there's a way in which this is like really straightforward and very much in line with what people are otherwise doing. And the novelty is the reporting process. And also like kind of, instead of doing what we usually do with qualitative research, which is pretend that the researcher's not really involved in, subjectively picking which quote from among the 10 that reflect, which one do you use? It's like, it turns out that's just a subjective choice. The poem form, I think, just says, yes, we are mixing our labor with the data in particular ways. So there's that. And the other thing, how can it become more acceptable? I just think doing it. And of course, like I have some, like I'm able to do it. Like I wouldn't say, a junior untenured scholar, like run right toward empirical poetry necessarily, but like, do you be bold if you want? Like, but I just think more people doing it and more people feeling free to think outside of the box is helpful.
It's powerful. You mentioned IRB. There was a question here about how you've come to think about the IRB process and that understanding of research ethics compared to your own commitment to being a steward of the stories that were shared with you. And then do we need a rethinking of research ethics?
I love that question.
It's a great one.
It's the kind of nerd stuff I like. But yeah, so I think IRB is really important and plays very specific functions, right? Like, so I think, making sure that we go through our paces and think hard about ways to interact with vulnerable populations, et cetera. I think some IRBs really do a good job of engaging in dialogue with researchers about how to improve their, so there's lots of value to IRB. I also think IRB, frankly, like protects universities from liability for like research gone wrong. There are valuable things, but I don't think the type of ethics I'm focused on is really just detached from that. Like it's like, that's good and, and I think this is because we don't necessarily imagine properly who the researcher is. Like there's a lot of like, make sure you don't, exploit people, which is really important, valuing people's times, all of these things, but like what you do with the data once it's collected, there's a lot, it's like you have taken someone's time, you have taken someone's story, that whatever your really narrow research question is, you're gonna find out a lot more than that. So like, how do you really, it's like dignity, like where's the dignity, the deeper dignity in the research process? And it's like, I think sometimes because we worry so much about over-research or just, certain types of negative experiences with communities with research, we don't really focus on like making the interview space a really human and connected space. I don't know, I'm starting to ramble, so I'll stop there.
No, I think that's really interesting. You know, as you were talking about that, one of the things I thought about is, although I never intended to write memoir, something I have coming out has been labeled memoir. And so I think a lot about how family members who are mentioned are going to think about that if they read about it. When you're thinking about audience, do you ever think, even though I know it's, you know, pseudonyms, if the women themselves were to encounter the poetry, are they in your mind as you're thinking about putting together a poem and whether the poem is good or bad and how it's being included in the work?
Yeah, deeply. I mean, in fact, I really feel like the process of constructing the poems and the manuscript is like they, as individuals, are mostly very much in my mind. And one of the things I hope is that whenever this all comes together, that I'm able to directly share it with people. Like I said, there's a whole drama with the contact information. So I wasn't, like, one really great thing to do would have been to share the poems with them directly, right? I can't do that, but what I can do is make the project available in the communities where they have lived. Because I think there's a real value of seeing your story, because they know they gave me their stories, right? Like they know that. There was quite a lot of intensity in the interviews. I don't think people are worried about about seeing their stories. They're worried about not seeing them. And so I think there's something powerful about seeing your story reflected in a writing. And I hope, especially in a poetic form, that can be really kind of beautiful and healing and hopefully help them see themselves in the way that I see them, which is just like incredible people.
So you talk about sharing in the future. Do we have Dr. Bell's spoken word to look forward to in Brooklyn? Or?
No.
No, okay. I was going to come. I was going to get on the train and come.
No one should want to see that. No one wants to see that.
So I think we're getting close to the end of time, but this is a really wonderful one to end with. It says, beautiful poems. Thank you. It struck me how much these women shared with you because you made them feel comfortable. How do we as a society make more people feel that they can research or write poetry? But I also think the question is an additional part is how do we create spaces of comfort so that people can share deeply with us so that we might be moved from empathy to coalition, as you hope?
I love that. I love that question, and I could ramble, so I'm gonna try not to. So just quickly, when I started the interviews, this was one of my first big research projects, and I was doing a lot of like talking about myself as a way of like, oh, we have this in common. Oh, you have family from the Carolinas, I'm from the Carolinas. Like there was a lot of this, and this was just wrong. Like it turned out what was better was just to be quiet. And listen intently. So if you actually look at the transcript, I mean, some people are like, why isn't there more of like your questions in the poems? It's like, my questions were not, I didn't ask a lot of questions. Like there was a lot of just like sit, look, tell me your story, and just sit there. Sit there in the discomfort of occasional silences, sit there and be patient. And that, I think, is actually how we can do a better job. It's just like being willing to be in community as difficult as it is.
Yes, it's a powerful invitation. I just want to end by saying thank you. Thank you for feeling that you want to live into the call for stewardship that you felt, but doing it in such an innovative and inspiring way. I hope that people will be inspired to think about all the different ways that we can engage with research and really honor people's time and their stories. So very inspiring, very innovative, and I will be first in line to get my copies of Soul Codes. So I just want to thank you so much for your presentation and your perspective. I also want to thank the audience here in the room and online for thoughtful questions that allowed us to learn more about your work and its future impact. To find out more about future programming and to watch videos of past events, you can find those at radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.